We're now live on YouTube with the November 6th edition of the Node.js modules team, joined by 6 people, including myself. We have a fairly full agenda, so let's just kick it off. To those on the call, if anyone could help with notes, that'd be greatly appreciated. So does anyone have a preference for the order that we go through these things? I think that it would probably make sense for us to probably start with conditional exports, then go to the index proposal, maybe then have a discussion about loader hooks and leave chartering to the end. We don't have quorum yet, so the chartering discussion, could maybe be punted on. Anyone have an issue with that order of operations? Cool. So conditional exports proposal. Guy, would you like to give people an update on where that's at and what's going on?
Sure, I can do that. I'm just trying to see if I've got anything to share here to make it a bit clearer, because it's always nicer to be able to see the examples of it. Unless someone else can share their screen with the docs on that. I'm just loading up the README. Okay, which button do I push to share my screen? Share screen. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Okay. So conditional exports are a way to, sorry, I'm really out of it today. Slow start. They're a way to map different specifiers in a package based on these kind of environment condition strings, like the example here. Note that the idea is for Node.js to initially just support a default string, which will always resolve. And then we have this require environment name that will only ever resolve when resolving from CommonJS. Further to the previous meeting, we have now flagged that require condition. So that condition is only available to only ever map when you have enabled experimental dual resolution flag, a new flag for Node.js, which is in the conditional exports PR. And when that flag is enabled, if there is a require condition, it'll branch into that condition. When that flag is not enabled, it'll just ignore any conditions it doesn't understand. And that's what allows us to enable things like browser conditions, which Node.js doesn't need to know anything about. It can just kind of advise. And tooling can hopefully take advantage of this kind of stuff. We've also removed the previous condition that we had, which was the, what was the other condition? The node condition for now. The idea with the node condition was if we wanted to select between different environments, like other non-Node.js JavaScript environments or server environments, we could specify different names for them instead of relying on the defaults. And there's some fine-grained behaviors around that because it's all about conventions. So if people are shipping default as the main entry, when they have, you kind of have these specific branches and then the default fallback. If we ship node as a condition, there is some risk that people will do browser and node, and then any other environment that comes up that doesn't match either of those conditions, because there exist Node.js environments that aren't the browser or Node.js, JS environments that aren't the browser or Node.js. So then what does it do in that case? Is it just supposed to fail, or will it still use the node condition? So that gets a little bit difficult. So for now, we've just disabled the node condition, and we can rethink that in future. It can be a follow-up PR after unflagging or whatever. And then I think that's everything on conditional exports for now. The other concerns kind of move into the index field concerns. But yeah, if there are questions on the behaviors or anything that needs clarifying, happy to go through it.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
What sort of use cases would conditional exports be useful for? Like feature
Right, so-
detection or?
Right. The main use case for me that I've always wanted this for is the browser splitting, because the tools are all sort of doing their own things, and they started by adding browser, and then they added to that module, and now they have all these other things that they check. And the concern with that is none of these approaches work with the semantics that we've defined for our current resolver. Sorry, I can't see the chat, so if someone can just read it out if there's anything, or if anyone has their hands up. Because we have these new semantics for exports, tools are potentially going to want to also be able to support exports in environments that aren't Node.js. So there's a kind of a tooling argument there. And then the way this worked out in why it's useful for Node.js is because it's a way for us to support dual mode, because we're not, because exports supply both for CommonJS and ES modules. There's no kind of splitting. So the idea of splitting between the resolvers can be handled by conditional exports, and that's what made it suitable to bring into Node.js. Otherwise, it is difficult to justify that Node.js should try and solve a tooling problem. But I think it does provide a lot of simplification, because without structuring specifications for the package JSON, like the package JSON is the most, like there is no spec for package JSON at all. Everyone does these organic things, and no one really thinks about how they're going to scale into all the possible ways they might interact with each other. And so you get these, you hit these kind of bottlenecks where it works fine initially, the browser field worked fine, the module field worked fine for a while, and then eventually it kind of breaks down where it hits all these edge cases. And now tools are having to implement things like module : browser, because does the module field mean it's for the browser or Node? Or by convention, a lot of people are using it for browser code. But how do you split on that? And so that it keeps getting more and more complicated if you just follow the shortest path. So at some point you say, there's all these cow paths being paved. Let's just sort of generalize what's already being done. And this is a kind of a simple proposal that grew out of discussions with various teams about it. And as I say, that the main benefit for Node is the dual mode. But for tools, it's being able to define these conditions like the browser particularly, but then also things like development or production. Some tools.
The React Native packager as well.
Right, so there are other environments that might want their own resolution. I've included Electron as an example as well. I know Electron has two environments. There's the renderer and the sort of Node side, and the browser. So it might want to decide what it wants to do, but it opens up a space that can potentially scale better than the scaling issues that we've been hitting, and a lot of people have been having issues with in tooling. Whether it is as fine-grained as like JavaScript environment with support for optional chaining as a string that then detects that, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think we want to see that. But I don't think tools will support that. Of course, when you open up these things, tools can do a lot of crazy stuff with it. They can come up with all these crazy ideas. But in general, I think that's a good thing for JavaScript. It's you know, it has this kind of Darwinian nature in these environments where you know, the best patterns will hopefully emerge, and hopefully, yes, all the awful things that you can imagine will be done by someone somewhere. But if we communicate well with tooling, and we as authors in the ecosystem continue to do our best work, you know, then the major cases become good patterns. And I think that there are a lot of good patterns here that simplify package creation, where if we were not to do it, it would be more complex to handle all these different cases. Sorry, that was a mouthful.
Alex, did you have any other questions, or was that a good coverage of it?
Oh yeah, that was good. Thanks.
Okay, great. Jeffrey, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think you were before me, Miles.
Jeffrey, you're really soft. Can you
Oh, sorry. I think Miles was first.
Guy said all the things I wanted to say for now.
Oh, okay. So I was just gonna say, I know that like I'm just a little concerned about the removing of the node field from this, just because like I understand I understand Guy's point about the risk of like people publishing browser and node and nothing else. But I think if we publish this without node, there's also the risk that people just start treating defaults meaning node, and they just put like the node specific version of the package in there because that's the only thing node will read. So they kind of have to put the node version in there, and then default isn't really its intent. Like if default is meant to be like, this is the kind of universal JavaScript one that can work in browsers and in Node and in wherever else, people kind of don't have a way of saying like, here's the one that relies on Node stuff like process or whatever, and then here's the one that's universal JavaScript. So I'm not gonna like block on this or anything, but I would wonder if we could maybe just include Node from the start, and then that sets the example for the other environments like Electron, like browser, etc., that this is the pattern to follow.
So I can speak to that for a second, Jeff, because I may be partially responsible for that getting removed. I still need to spend more time thinking about like the naming that we're doing. I understand I'm just painting the bike shed here. But I'm not like super thrilled specifically with like the use of require as the name there. And if we're going to include node, like what the semantics of node is, what's the order of operation, and what's like just the user experience feels a little odd to me where we have both require and node, and which one trumps which and what the order is and how we best educate people on that. So, I had brought up the request of having those other flags put behind the experimental dual resolution flag and keeping that flag specific to the feature rather than the name of, those particular fields. I am more than happy to have both require and node behind that flag. Although I do want that to, like clearly known that I want us discussing what those particular fields are a little bit more, the relationship to them and the order of operations, which also I have not had a ton of bandwidth to really think through and come up with a concrete alternative proposal. But I personally, for what it's worth, have no problem with that landing for now, with both node and require behind the experimental dual resolution flag, with the explicit understanding as a group that we're going to spend a little bit more time working through those semantics, and that they are subject to change. Guy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, it's a shame we have Jan here today because I know he's also keen to see the node resolution, and that was potentially also something that would affect his thinking around and flagging as well, even. So maybe we should discuss changing the name of the flag and then including both the require and node condition behind the flag. Would that make sense?
I mean, honestly, I am happy with adding node back right now and landing this with node and require being behind the flag and then further discussing it. I personally don't have a problem with us shipping that. I don't know if other people feel differently.
Seems strange to ship two fields that work the same but have a different name.
But they don't work the same, right? Because Node, like if you wanted to do dual entry points, I believe, and then Guy, you could correct me if I'm wrong, require would trump node in the common JS loader, and node would trump require in the ESM loader. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And that
that's
seems
the
like it should
reason-
be require and import.
Yeah, exactly.
not
And so
require.
Jordan, that's the exact naming stuff that I think we need to talk through. Because I think it's confusing, and I think that like the semantics, we may want to tweak that a bit, but then it becomes weird because if we make it import, then that's not node, right? Like, so maybe we want to have a node flag and then have a sub flag for import and like, I think we need to talk about it a little bit more, but I think that require and node, as it's documented right now and as it's implemented and ready to go, is good enough to put behind a flag, and maybe even get feedback from people that they think it's confusing, or maybe they're okay with the semantics as they exist. The reason for having both of those specifically would be so that you do not have to use the default flag specifically for node. Which, you know, was the concern that like, you know, people will start using default in a dual mode module, and default would mean node, which node is not necessarily the default of a package. So, I mean, for what it's worth, and for the sake of time, unless people want to like spend some time going through and suggesting alternatives here.
What if default pointed not to a file path, but to the name of another key in the object?
I think that would be pretty confusing. And you might not necessarily have a key that also used the like the, you know, the universal JavaScript version. You know what I mean?
Sorry, I just cut out there for a second. I don't know if anyone heard my comment.
I said you might
I
not
got a response.
necessarily have like one another environment that's also using the like quote unquote universal JavaScript version. Like say you had browser node and default, like the browser might get a browser specific thing, node might get a node specific thing, and then there isn't some other key that's getting the like universal version. You know what I mean?
I see.
I mean, you could create
Okay.
one like universal : and then whatever, and then you have default to be universal, but it just seems, I don't know, seems a little circular.
So, I mean, with that, oh, Guy, you have your hand up, and then I'll add something after.
I was just going to expand on the exact case around the dual specifier hazard and how it behaves. But if we want to finish this track of discussion first, I can wait.
Okay, what I would like to suggest, if people are open to it, I think that, and so, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll always need a default case here. And I think like that was feedback that Brad gave, that was feedback that Jan had. You know, the way in which we're setting up these fields for conditionals are kind of, but not exactly like a case, like a switch statement. So I think that we can all get on the same page that we will likely always have a default field. What and if we want to support alternative fields other than default is, you know, the discussion that I think we need to have moving forward. I think that it sounds like Jeffrey and Jan are of the opinion that for the flagged implementation, it is much more of a full proper implementation of a complete feature if it includes the node field. Since those are both behind an additional flag and we have the explicit warning that it can change, I'm personally fine with us shipping that implementation and then potentially changing everything that's behind that flag as we further discuss it and work at the semantics. Does anyone have any problems with that? So Guy, you have your hand up. I'll kick it back to you. And, you know, if you could chime in.
Yeah, I can just firstly follow up on that. Maybe we should change the flag name from dual resolution which was kind of trying to refer specifically to whether or not a require condition is supported, to calling it, say, experimental conditions or something.
I was just gonna say, why don't you just call it experimental conditional exports? And then it can be like whatever the parts of this feature that are still experimental, just go
Right.
behind
So-
there,
so the
even though we're
important
unflagging
thing-
part of it.
The important thing for me with that is that we can still support the object with the default. Just to give, it's probably a good time to go through the example now. If someone writes a package like this, and they're running a node that doesn't support conditional exports, that package isn't going to be able to load. So if we flag the require condition, what that means is that you'll always be like, without the flag for the require condition, the package will always load the module case, effectively not working from require. But
Which is the behavior we agreed upon for unflagging, correct?
sorry?
Which seems to be the behavior that we agreed upon for
Right.
unflagging.
Right. So then whether you get these other conditions applying as well as the default is the sort of flag. So experimental conditions or experimental exports conditions or something, I can update the PR to that later today.
For what it's worth though, Guy, and like, you know, I'm good not bike shedding on this too much. I don't think that the proposal as it's landing right now with just the default is even conditional exports, because there are no conditions. There's just a default. It's just like a verbose syntax, right? So I think
Right.
experimental conditional exports is a reasonable name to use, but I think experimental
Okay.
conditions is also reasonable.
All right. No, that's a great point. And I'm
For the back of Pat Hazard, we might want to, like, even if we decided we weren't going to do conditional exports, we still might want the object form to kind of keep the design space open for the future.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So yeah, I'm happy to just say we're going to support the object form, and then behind the flag, you get the actual conditions. That works for me.
Yeah, because the object form is just sugar for the array form with an object in the first item. So it's not adding any new features, it's just sugar. So like to me, it is those additional conditions that is the conditional exports proposal at this point.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. The other topics we can possibly discuss around that, this is ordering as well. You mentioned, Miles. Is it worth going into that?
I'm personally happy with just like you and Jan and everyone spent a lot of time thinking about what is in there right now. And I honestly have just not had the bandwidth to really think through it. We do have, for anyone who's on the call right now or listening, we're doing a really small user design research session next Monday in San Francisco. So if you're going to be in the city and interested, feel free to reach out to me. My DMs are open. And I was planning on getting a build of Node that essentially had like modules working with all of these flags removed and with all of these features enabled and just kind of playing with it. And I think I'll be in a better position to like really make a concrete proposal after like actually making some dual mode modules. So that was a long way of saying like, I'm really happy with shipping behind a flag what you all have landed on right now, and actually just playing with it before giving concrete feedback.
If we did like move the fields around, I kind of like the idea of putting require and import under the node field, for example. I mean, if we change the PR something along those lines, is everyone still okay with like however the fields move around in the discussion on GitHub, or does anyone have any concerns?
Like that format would be fine too, like as long as the node field is the one behind the flag, but the object form is not, then we can continue to iterate over.
No, the object with default would be unflagged, but I'm saying like, just in case we may rejigger around what the flag stuff looks like, because obviously there sounds like there's some concerns, so that we can avoid having to like go back to the group for another, round of consensus, et cetera. Are people okay with like kind of, or I guess, are people okay with just like observing GitHub, and then if there's any concerns, you mention it there, but we don't necessarily need to like go for consensus in another meeting?
I'm happy to treat the exact condition names as experimental and changing.
Yeah, I think, and then someone can interrupt me if they disagree with this, that it's absolutely fine for us to play with what's behind that flag, and then, continue to give the team updates and potentially even discuss in a team meeting if we want to have more of a discussion. But then, obviously we need to take it to the team before unflagging. So I think there's
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
like,
I'm just talking about landing the flagged version.
oh yeah, I get, well, I think that we already had consensus in the last meeting to land the flag version. So I think we can move forward and work, and then, we just want to like continue to update the team on the progress there, so that, we get ahead of any objections that may come forward before unflagging, by the timeline of end of January, which I think was the initial timeline that we suggested, barring any other proposals that accomplish similar behavior.
Okay.
So I think with like that said, we don't have quorum right now, but I think we're just reestablishing consensus that we had in the last meeting. So I think it's fine to just do it this way. But is everyone okay with landing this proposal, with adding back node, putting node and require behind a single flag? Anyone have any concerns with that? Cool. Guy, are you cool taking that back to the PR and updating it?
Yeah, I can do that now.
Okay, great. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I guess we should move on to index, right? Because if we were going to support index, that would be a pretty big change, which we should land before unflagging if we were going to do it.
Yeah, sure. Should I introduce index then as well?
I think so, yeah.
All right. So yeah, up until now, we've been absolutely fine with having this sugar for exports, where you can treat it as a string that points to the main, and we can think of exports as the new main. But have conditional resolution, we can't do this. Let me just open up a simple code example here. And this question, I want to be very clear, it's entirely about typing and aesthetics. There is nothing here to do with semantics or how things behave. It's all just about typing. And the reason why typing matters is because this is something that is done, like it is one of the most common things when you're creating a project. You write a package JSON and set the main and install some dependencies. I did a basic analysis on about 1,400 dependency packages and how they get loaded. And of all the ways that they were loaded, only 109 of those packages were loaded in a way at all that used any subpath require. So I think it agrees with intuition. I think it's pretty clear that the majority of packages only ever need a single main entry point. Exports is an excellent feature. It allows those packages to be encapsulated, and that it allows a whole lot of neat features. Jordan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I very much don't agree with your conclusion, because what you're sampling is public packages importing other public packages. I think a great many imports of public packages are done by private code. And so we don't actually get a clear picture here in either direction.
Well, we can only sample what's public. Yes.
Sure. Well, of course. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that there was more sampling you could have done. You certainly did a great, the most you could have done there. But I think this also specifically, this isn't something that's likely to be typed very often. Like we could easily add this to npm init, to where you type a file path and then it automatically puts the correct format in the package JSON. I think that the number of people that manually edit package JSON is actually very small, and that it would be also totally fine for us to create a tool that can make it easy to interact with these things. In other words, I don't think we should, just like with code, I don't think we should be optimizing for writing and typing. I think we should be optimizing for reading and like maintainability, the ability for tools to work with it and for humans to read it and understand it. And syntax sugar shortcuts tighten the design space, restrict it, and also potentially raise questions about what it means, whereas the longer forms do not. I'll also note I was playing with the new NPM funding field that they released like yesterday, and the string field doesn't even seem to work properly. So like there's even confusion around this, the people building the tooling around these fields when they deal with the shortcuts. So I would personally be very happy if we just removed that string shortcut and kind of made people go over the hump of, in the beginning, of putting the larger object form, which tooling can do. And then
Right.
that also reduces the diff churn when they add number 2, if they ever do.
So the basic proposal is, because the string sugar is limited, we should not support it. So this kind of main should not be supported.
And we can also say not supported for now. Like it doesn't have to be
we should tell all
forever.
users that they need to do .export to refer to the main, and then we're telling them this is your new main. Now, if I'm a existing or beginner Node.js user, and you tell me to do the top one when I've been doing the bottom one, I'm just not going to listen to that. There is no way I'm going to write this when I can write this. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to write the simplest short thing. That
Yeah, you're saying this, but we can't see what you're typing.
We're only looking at Firefox, Guy. If you're like on another.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me
You share your whole screen rather than the app.
Can you see that now?
So you're saying there's no way someone's going to write the second one when the third one exists.
Well,
that was what you were saying.
This is what we've been saying for the sugar, and that's nice.
Right.
You can tell someone to do it, and you say, if you do this, your package is automatically encapsulated. So you've just defined a main, but now all your tooling knows that this package only needs to export the main, and you get all those encapsulation benefits. So we want people to do this. It's a good thing. If we remove the sugar, which I think is like the base point that we all agree on, we're now telling users, here's what you must type every time you want to define a main entry for your package. And this is the good and right best practice new thing to do. But you can still do this and it will work. I think it's a very simple thing. Like,
but it will work, but it won't limit access to all of the other files you might ship with your package.
Right, but what I'm saying is, like, we want to encourage a single best practice. You want to say, this is how you define your package. And like, for me personally, there is no way I would ever write this in one of my packages when I could write this, because I just want to get my code running.
Even though they're not equivalent.
I mean, the second one gives you encapsulation and the third one doesn't.
Right.
Right. But I don't really care that much about encapsulation. I just want to get my main entry point working. And that's all I care about. I don't really care if tooling knows whether or not there exists subpaths that can be required in my package. That does not concern me. What I care about is just getting my code running.
Well, there's one other case though, is like once we add conditional exports into the mix and you want to have like a separate export for require and import, you're going to use the middle one there because, you know, you have to. You can't do that with main. So...
Right. Well, and Guy, what you're saying is you only care about getting your code running. That's fair. And if you have to manually type that out, you have a compelling argument. But as I said, npm init does most of this stuff, and a tool like an additional tool could easily do it. Like people don't tend to handwrite package JSON anymore. So
Right.
like, it would just be a question of how ergonomic we want the
Right.
tooling to be, which could just be, what's your main file? Do you want to, like, the default is encapsulation because it's really good for all these reasons, yes or no?
Right.
Hit enter,
Yeah.
and right, and like,
Certainly.
problem solved.
Yeah, I'm just sharing that, like, I know it seems like a small and stupid thing, but aesthetics matter, because when you have a small repetitive task that is being done at a large scale, a lot of people are copying what they see elsewhere. If I'm looking at packages and I see one package that does this, and I see one package that does the exports dot, and I haven't otherwise read any documentation or know anything else, I've just looked at what other people are doing, I'm going to copy the simple one that makes sense to me, because I'm like, okay, this is a main. I know what that is. I'm going to copy that pattern because it makes sense to my brain. It fits the fact that I don't have any mental model of what's going on, but I can immediately match it to some kind of model that makes sense to me.
How are you not going to have any mental model if you're looking at two existing packages?
I'm just saying, if you'd never told me anything and I see a package like this, I would immediately have like a visceral reaction against the dot syntax. Like it just looks bad aesthetically. So already my brain doesn't like it. And then secondly, I don't understand what it's doing. I don't understand what exports means. I don't understand why there's a dot there, and I don't understand why, I'm not,
but you wouldn't
like,
understand what
doing
main means
things
either.
I don't know what it's doing.
You wouldn't understand what main means either, and you wouldn't understand, like, you wouldn't understand a bunch of stuff. Like, I think anybody building a package has to have some context, and no amount of package JSON sugar is going to fix that problem. And if you assume that people have some sort of minimum context when they come in, which obviously not everyone will, but like, if you assume that people do have that, then I don't think the visceral reaction.
I think we should design our ecosystem to be accessible to everyone. I think that's really important, and it should be
right. But I guess I'm prioritizing the second step from I got something basic published to now I'm following best practices and maintaining my package, as opposed to the very first initial step. Like, I'm not trying to optimize for getting the most people in the funnel.
Can I please interrupt for 1 second with a quick point of order? Because I think all of this is presupposed on something. The first example that you have there, Guy, with the export string syntax, right? At the top. Have we dropped support for that already in the implementation?
We haven't, but that's what we're discussing here. And I can go through a quick argument about the upgrade path, or otherwise you can read the description. But the justification is kind of around how the kind of idea of progressively defining your application. And if you're starting from this case and wanting to add a dual mode, that it's not as simple as just doing exports where you can then say require goes to main.cjs, otherwise fall back to main.mjs. Instead, what I have to do is I have to start from this case, and then I have to change it to like exports, and then there's kind of a double step where you then have to know that you're going to a dot, and then you have the require and the.
I think that's fine, honestly. And the reason why I would say that is the second that someone's thinking about making a dual package, there's an advanced thought there as a package author that requires knowing so many different things that we're already saying we need to educate everyone who's doing dual packages on the dual specifier hazard, and they need to understand singletons. I don't think that extra step of adding a dot is a bit of education for dual packages that is.
That's not the only reason you'd use the object form. You'd also do it if you were having multiple entry points. And multiple entry points, while rare, are, in my opinion, a better practice. Obviate the need for all the tooling around tree shaking. Like, tree shaking is a tax that we only have because everybody insists on using manifest exports.
But if you're not doing dual mode, and you don't need to restrict entries, you can still just use main.
Yes. Yeah, that's. I think we want to encourage encapsulation.
Correct. Like that's encapsulation is very much a best practice. So like in that regard, I agree with Guy's characterization here. We want to make exports easy to adopt for that reason. And I think that like it's a safer default. It's the way it would have been great if Node had worked
And
in the beginning,
it is
etc.
competing with main because main still works. So there's that kind of aspect. There's a potential foot gun where you forget that you're using the dot. You just upgrade it to an object like this, and now it'll just fail.
Wes has their hand up. Wes?
I mean, can I just like attack the core conceit of the argument for only having the most verbose form? Like, do you believe, like, do we believe as a group that a package JSON file should be readable for humans? Like, is that an important feature of the JSON document?
Yes, but it's not objective that the currently highlighted syntax is unreadable, or that the dot section is unreadable.
Well, it certainly has more cognitive overhead.
Has more stuff in it, sure, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily that much less readable or significantly less readable that it's a problem.
I was just suggesting that we drop the exports shorthand until the conditional syntax was finalized. And then we can bring it back. And then when we bring it back, we'll decide like, okay, is this confusing with like Guy's currently highlighted example? Are people likely to get confused with, you know, the shorthand versus the conditional? That was my only concern. I'm not like opposed to it in general, but since the rest of this syntax is kind of in flux, I felt like we don't need it for now. So let's kind of like land it along with landing the final version of the syntax for conditionals was what I was proposing.
And for the record, I would agree with what Jeffrey's saying as well. Like a big part of my argument here is keeping the design space open, which out of necessity means we can add it back later. But if we add it now, we can never change what it means theoretically. So like, I would also be in favor of bringing it back later along with conditional exports once we've decided and convinced ourselves that the shorthand semantics are actually intuitive.
Is that okay with you, Wes?
What's
your opinion?
Like, my opinion is just that like I like the UX of just the simple you find and replace main with exports. That's something you can tell people who are currently writing packages today to do that, and that's a super easy thing to tell them to do. Once you tell them to expand it more, naturally you have to start explaining why certain things are required. Like when you say you change main to exports and you get encapsulation, they can nod along and be like, that is a good thing. When you say, well, you change main to exports and then you add a dot to specify that it's the main entry point, they go, well, okay, what if I guess that's okay. And they're like, okay, and then you need to also make it an object that specifically says default because you might have multiple platforms and they're like, whoa, hold on. I'm just writing a script for, my server in the back end. Can I just not have a package JSON? Like, do I need all this anymore? You've asked me to start adding quite a bit here. It's like, oh.
Well, that case would just use main. I mean,
right, but the reason this matters so much is because this is the beginner Node.js experience in a lot of ways. It's the beginner package publishing experience, and it really does. It's the experience that defines a lot of people's first experience with these processes. And I think it's really important we think a lot about it and make sure it feels good, because make it feel good means people will do it more. It directly leads to success of the ecosystem. I mean, I don't mean to overblow it, but I don't want to understate.
So also, we would very much like to be able to completely stop referring to main in its entirety. It should never be like something we have people or tell people about or ask them to fall back to. We'd like to say like encapsulation is not only the default. Like we don't talk about main anymore. It is not something we would like people to use. It's quietly deprecated.
So I guess a quick question here. And this would be to both Guy and Jan from the exports proposal perspective. Like we're talking about not allowing, the string syntax here, but it seems like, like one of the bigger challenges here would, and Jeff, to your point, we do have quorum now. But it seems like the bigger question would actually be the dot syntax. Because if we think the dot is confusing, like we could use a different sigil there, but is this perhaps showing that the exports proposal is not ready to be unflagged if we're talking about this level of kind of like core semantics that we still want to maybe flesh out?
I think it's worth noting that since we do have the self-reference proposal underway, you could easily replace the dot with whatever is decided on for the self-reference proposal.
That's true. That would add a lot of consistency.
Jeffrey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's a good sigil. Like we all intuitively know what it meant. I doubt we're going to find something better. I mean, we can always add additional ones like the package name itself, or if there's some other self sigil, sure.
Well, the package name could be a subpath, so that wouldn't work. But yeah, sigil or something.
Well, not if it's just like starts with name rather than /name. But yeah, there is an argument for like having people to make the effort to use the dot, and that's like it kind of subtly pushes them in the direction of, hey, you can have multiple exports here. You don't have to just export one thing, which will hopefully start encouraging people to provide multiple exports for packages that could potentially do that, which is something we want to encourage.
Well, and along with that is it sets up a better mental model for them. Like it's if anybody who is essentially forced to use the object syntax for exports will be thinking about how exports and entry points work in a more correct way, in a way that will lead them to probably author a better package, as opposed to, you know, I guess unless you're trying to claim that every package on npm is authored well, like I think that a lot of that kind of slipshod approach is because it is so easy and approachable, which is a good thing. But the downside, the trade-off there is that people have wildly variant and inaccurate mental models about how node packages work. And I would prefer to optimize for longer term understanding and cohesion of mental models than just focusing on getting the most number of people to create their first package.
So how about this? Do we potentially have core or agreement on like, could we, along with what we've already stuck on the conditional exports flag of like the node field and or the require field, could we stick the shorthand of exports behind that flag as well? And then we can continue to like figure out how these, you know, are supposed to interact with each other. And then we can kind of unflag it all together once we've got a good solution for that.
I mean, the problem is that the stuff that's currently behind the flag, if we just delete that from Node, nobody's package breaks. They just have functionality that doesn't kick in. If we delete the string syntax, then packages would break potentially, or they would have a bunch of fluff that would be like,
no, I'm saying we wouldn't have the string syntax on flag, like the default.
No, right. What I'm saying is if someone publishes a package that needs the flags to work properly and currently, and then we delete the flagged functionality, then their package still works. They just have like targets in their exports thing that don't do anything. But if they ship with the string syntax, which is behind a flag, and then we delete the string syntax, then we have two choices. Either that package no longer works unflagged, or it's silently ignored, which I would argue is worse, because then people will think that they're defining in exports, and in fact, they're not encapsulating it all. They're falling back to exposing everything or whatever semantics we decide. Does that make sense? What I'm like I'm thinking like
yeah, but
because obviously if we end up just unflagging all the flag stuff, it's fine.
Interrupting for a second, sorry, but
yeah, go ahead.
Had their hand up for a little bit.
Sorry,
Guy.
Sorry, you cut out there. I wasn't sure if you said my name. Yeah, I just wanted to flip the argument slightly. I mean, there have been lots of good arguments for various points here, but I haven't actually heard any arguments against index. So I wanted to know, does anyone specifically dislike index or have reasons for not wanting to go in this kind of a direction?
Yes.
I think that it's one more thing that we need to teach people. And I know that dot is something that we definitely need to teach people, but like having more and more fields in the package JSON, I like the idea that all of this is under a single flag, and I don't think that the dot export is an incorrect mental model of how you think about this.
Or a single feature, you mean? Or a single field, I mean?
Yeah, like I see these
right.
all as like one thing. And I do think teasing it out into a separate index field starts to just kind of like pile on all the different things that people need to know and remember.
So there was one way that we were looking at supporting an exports without a dot property for the singular case. So a kind of a sugar for the singular case. And that's another thing that we haven't really discussed fully yet. The way this detection can work is if you have keys and say the rule could be either all of the keys must start with a dot forward slash, and we can have an error that very carefully throws if it's mixed. So if you try to do something like this, it would throw and say there's a path export. It doesn't know if it's, you know, what it is. And then if every single key is like, doesn't start with a dot forward slash, we can say it's a conditional sugar. Or if every key starts with a dot forward slash, noting that this is narrowing the design space of exports, then we know that it's a path based, and then we can very carefully make errors for the mixed cases. Is some kind of sugar like that a possible alternative that people would be okay with?
That seems like we have two different modes of looking at this object, and it's magic and implicit about which one it is. That seems like it would be
the concern.
Way easier for tools to break and way to do wrong, and way harder for people to understand just by looking at it.
What I'm saying is I see this is this will be like 90% of packages will be doing this in future, right? They will likely be supporting different environments, and so they will likely have different cases being handled. And so this is our 90% package case. This is the major case of how people are going to define packages. And if we're always mandating this dot, the concern is like a kind of a just it's explicitness, but it's 5 characters, and like it avoids a whole bunch of implicitness and confusion. It's human, but yeah, tell me not have slight negative feelings towards.
Right, I just need to interrupt right now because the meeting's going to end in 2 minutes, and we're expecting a fire drill in my building, so this will be a hard cut at 4. I think that where we're at right now essentially means that like we have removed the flag on exports as a whole for unflagging modules at the moment. The level of semantics that we're discussing changing here genuinely makes me uncomfortable. Just a question to the room, should we reflag exports while we work this out?
I mean, I don't know, go ahead.
I feel like no, but maybe the string form. I know the string form is going to be 90% of cases, but that's the one that makes me nervous. Like not having exports at all means then that we go back to the thing where people have to do like package/index.mjs or whatever, and it's a lot less ergonomic. Like that's one of the reasons we created exports in the first place. So we'd have to rewrite all those docs to now be like, oh, and there's these ugly extensions at the end, etc.
Yeah, but if we do any of these things that we're talking about, like index or supporting require browser default, we would probably not want to support dot. Like if we supported index, we would not want to have both index and dot as things.
No, I absolutely want dot.
Yeah, but if we don't have index, then we would still have the dot. So the only difference is the index field. Like that's the only thing that would, I think, change a lot.
If we have the index field, we should not support dot, because then which one takes precedent?
Like
yeah, right. No, I agree. But if we don't have the index field,
no,
we'll
I don't
always
agree
support
with that.
dot.
Because we're gonna have dot slash, so I should be able to do dot as well. Like I want to be able to define all my exports under the exports key. I don't want to have to like have one of them be under index and the rest under export.
Then I think that the conclusion of that is that we should not do index, because if you have both an index and a dot, which one takes precedent?
Well, we would just have to define that, just like we're defining which one takes precedence between.
But then people need to know that, and then that's confusing.
I know. Yes.
So it sounds like to me, and I could be wrong, is that we are then saying we do not want to have index.
Or at least we don't have a consensus on it for sure.
Potentially there is sugar for for things at the top level of the export object that do not have a dot at the beginning of them. But then similarly, if you want to support the syntax of the second example that Guy has there of require browser default, are you going to support that while also supporting named exports? If you do that, then how do you decide if you have a dot or you have those? Like, this introduces so many like different branching code paths. I'm personally,
That's kind of why I'm like, let's just unflag the verbose exports and that's it for now. And then all these other sugars can be hashed out, under flags, and we can keep talking about them. But I think we're
guess
pretty
what I'm
settled
saying
on the verbose syntax.
the verbose syntax with the dot makes no sense at all. If we're going to do any of these other things, we should have one or the other. And so if we're at the point where we want to discuss like one or the other, then I think all of exports should probably go behind a flag so we can work that out. Otherwise, it seems like we maybe should just have a conversation today and just make a decision to move forward with dot. Otherwise, if we do not have consensus to move forward with dot, I think we should put all of exports back behind a flag. It could be unflagged in short order, but I don't think that we should ship support for dot if we're talking about having any of these other sugars, because I personally do not like the idea of having multiple ways of writing this. I think we should pick, one idiomatic way of doing this, and that be the way that you do it.
Well, if we don't do dot, then we have to rewrite all these docs for ESM. So that'll slow down unflagging modules only slightly, but a little bit.
No, but we can just flag all of
for using the
exports.
index field. So if there is no like chance of consensus or rough consensus for the index field, then it sounds like we're back to the dot. And then the only open question is, what do we do with the string sugar? And that's something that we can either remove or put behind the flag or leave unflagged. And that's the only decision left to us. And the rest of exports doesn't need to change. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
I don't think that's right, because in the second example that Guy has there of require browser default, I do not think that we should be supporting that and supporting dot.
Well, right, but that's not part of the current proposal. That was an alternative that we could consider. So you're saying if we are considering that alternative, then we should reflag exports.
Exactly. Basically what I'm saying, and something that we should consider, is exports is unflagged right now. The second that exports is unflagged and released, if we do it in modules where we have exports unflagged and the dot is there, people are using that and push it out in the ecosystem. And Wes, you're saying supporting both seems like it could be reasonable, and I agree with you that it could be reasonable, but I don't think it's a decision we should be making in the last 5 minutes of a meeting. So if we do not have general consensus about the dot syntax or the sugar, I think we should put all of exports behind a flag temporarily while we work that out. That should not block the unflagging of modules, and we should get that out.
Out for me, I don't know if that's just me.
Alternatively, we could just ship this with modules, but I think that it will be rather churny if we land on something that has us removing the dot syntax.
I mean, personally, I don't see us removing the dot syntax. That's already had consensus for months now. And it seems like index has a lot of opposition. So I don't know what other.
Okay. So then an alternative here would be, we're all saying that we will absolutely always support the dot syntax. If we want to add additional sugar, that additional sugar would need to be able to work with the dot syntax and us having consensus around that. Does that seem like where we're at then?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So what then?
Who is against the sugar case that's highlighted here? Or
I'm
has-
not against it. I'm just not sure that we should have both that sugar and the dot.
Yeah,
Because
I
we-
can't really see it on your screen right now, Guy, but I mean, I would also like to, I'm not really in favor right now. I would like to discuss it further.
The question that I have is like, what would you do in the case where someone defines those top level exports, but then also defines the dot?
So what I was saying is we would have some kind of special error that would validate exports objects, and if you have any field that starts with a dot alongside, either every key must start with a dot, or every key must not start with. Mixed, you have a special mixed error. Some exports start with dots, some don't. You must do one or the other to indicate, and then point to a documentation page or something. Just work out how to clearly clarify that to avoid a foot gun.
Okay, so it seems then like we have consensus about exploring this sugar, that it's purely additive and would not change how things work today. In that case, then, is there any reason to not support the string syntax right now?
Yeah, the same reasons is that it locks down the design space, and there's confusion about the semantics in the absence of conditional exports.
But that's only once we unflag modules.
Well, yeah, but we're hoping unflagged modules in, you know, a matter of days. So,
Well, what if we delayed it to the next meeting?
We can do that.
Did we just have a fire alarm somewhere?
I think
not
Miles
yet.
did.
I have not been evacuated yet, or if I have been evacuated, I'm locked in the building. Okay, so how about this? Because we're almost 10 minutes over, should we kick conversation back to, like, I guess we're closing the index proposal, then kicking conversation back to the conditional exports proposal. I will remove my LGTM on it and try to work at the semantics in that issue, and then bring it back to the group in 2 weeks and try to get everything else ready to go with modules. And if we could have consensus in the next meeting, then we can unflag in basically 2 weeks.
I
Sounds
mean,
like
I just really want to be unflagged this month. So that's my only concern. Is there any risk that we wouldn't have everything done and the flag dropped like in 2 weeks? Because I mean, the rest of the end of the month is basically lost for Thanksgiving for many of us. So I think we'll have to make some of these decisions before the next meeting.
Yep. That's why I'm saying we should work in the tracker, and then if we need to meet in person, we can too. I have that user research thing that I'm doing on Monday, and I could talk to some people as well. Let's kick this back to async and try to get it wrapped up, and then basically do what we did today, and hopefully by the end of the meeting in 2 weeks, we can at the very least have consensus around, you know, the shape of exports to be okay with unflagging.
Okay.
Is everyone okay with that?
Okay.
And I guess in lieu of that, also, Guy's saying he's going to update the conditional exports proposal. Perhaps we can just quickly reach consensus that if Guy can get that proposal in a place where we have sign off and no objections in the proposal, you know, then maybe we can just move forward anyways. And if anyone has a problem with where the proposal is, please bring it up in the proposal, independent of whether or not you have a commit bit on core. We'll respect those objections. Because if we can reach consensus at a band on this, I don't think we necessarily even need to wait till the next meeting. Are people okay with that?
Sure.
All right, cool. Anyone have anything else to add last minute before we call it? Okay, I'm gonna take down this